Now, such is China's global fear-mongering that I have to make a very clear disclaimer for this show. We're not discussing recognition of Taiwan now, but rather recognition only as a consequence of any future attack by China. John, let me come to you first. How powerful would you say this threat of deterrence could be against China?
In most views, the idea of there being an international community recognizing Taiwan, that was considered a red line. But if China tries and fails, that is catastrophic. I mean, domestically within China, that's catastrophic. I mean, Xi Jinping goes from being a guy whose statue would be on every street corner to being categorized with the folks in the Qing dynasty that lost the Opium Wars or the Boxer Rebellion or something like that. Nobody really wants that. I don't think, and if you look at, in terms of a deterrence, the whole reason the international community has essentially agreed that Taiwan is not officially recognized as a state, a lot of that comes out of this kind of deterrence, out of this desire that, well, if we do this, then the deal is that China doesn't attack and that we maintain peace and that there will eventually be a peaceful resolution. And if that is taken off the table by China attacking, then really, all bets are off. All the international community can do whatever they want to do.
Let me bring Julian in from New York.
I'm not sure how much of a deterrence. I would have said 3 years ago that if there's a wide recognition of Taiwan as a state, it would deter China. But I think one thing we've learned from the Ukraine is that universal recognition of Ukraine as a state did not sufficiently deter Russia from invading Ukraine.
But what we're discussing today is something different. It's not recognizing Taiwan in advance.
Right, but I'm saying that if you recognize Taiwan in the future, it shows that even recognition is not necessarily a very valuable shield. And I guess what I'm saying is that we've learned, I think, from the Ukraine experience that statehood is not as much of a shield against invasion as you might imagine.
Let me just bring John back quickly back in there to respond to that. So what do we know that China wants to do that might be different to the situation between Russia and Ukraine? I mean, obviously we have to talk about one China.
With regards to Taiwan, I think there would be a change of status, and the idea of making them conscious perhaps of what the consequences of invading and failing one of those results would be nobody would have to follow along with this kind of weird, as people in the legal departments would call it, it's like, de jure versus de facto. In fact, countries around the world have relations with Taiwan, which I think may give some pause because the world will change if they try and fail. They can't just do a halfway measure. It can't be. It will close the door. The world reaction will be very different if they try and fail and then 20 years from now try again.
Professor Liu, so we've heard two different views there. With Julian, it really wouldn't make much of a difference. John is saying that it would be a huge step change and therefore something for China to think about. There's also the knee-jerk reaction when speaking to people about this idea that saying that we would recognize Taiwan if there was an attack would simply provoke China. Where does that come from? If the condition is these countries, if they were willing to, would have a coordinated effort to recognize Taiwan only if there is force used against Taiwan. So how does that provoke China into doing the thing that then provokes that response?
As John just mentioned about China already drew this red line. That means do not recognize Taiwan and then you will be punished or several diplomatic relations. So this is already something there. So if there were some kind of coordinated efforts against China or give some threat, I think this could have counterproductive. In reality, I'm not saying for China, but you're familiar with Chinese communists. When it comes to using the military forces, they have to be very careful. So they will make this kind of cost and benefit analysis because we talk about Gaza and Israel. That's so different things because Chinese believe Taiwan is part of China. So that is why they have already learned lesson from KMT.
So what we're saying, though, in that cost-benefit
incident
analysis, if we make it very clear that there is this other cost, which, to date perhaps has not been very clearly expressed to China. I think that's the argument of this concept. Let's go to the next question. We showed at the top of the show how this condition of peace is clearly written into US law, and we'll show it again here. And in fact, the US's One China policy itself is also guided by the foundational Taiwan Relations Act, making a double reference to peace as the foundation of US recognition of China over Taiwan. And that China recognition rests, quote, upon the expectation that the future of Taiwan will be determined by peaceful means. Many US allies use the same wording for their One China policies. Let me go to Julian again online. So Julian, you're an international law expert. So that kind of wording written into US law, what does it actually mean could happen if, therefore, there was war?
So I think this is a very important domestically within the US, and it's a way to sort of focus and shape U.S. policy so that all the government entities within the U.S. are sort of committed to this long-term policy, and it has been successful in keeping the U.S. basically on the same page throughout many different presidential administrations. And so I think this is the right approach, which is that the U.S. Is not going to take a strong position on whether Taiwan is a state or not. As long as, and we expect that any resolution of the question is going to be settled peacefully, and the U.S. will actually further give Taiwan support and ability to defend itself.
But that is the kind of language that we use in general. We expect that, countries should be peaceful. But what I'm asking is, what we showed is that the TRA says recognition of China rests on the expectation that Taiwan's future will be determined by peaceful means. Does that make it clear that if war broke out, then the US doesn't recognize China or can then recognize Taiwan?
Well, I think it's true that it does reflect an implicit agreement, the deal that we're talking about, that essentially the U.S. no longer, at the time, it was no longer recognized the Republic of China in exchange for the promise that whatever happens will be resolved peacefully. And so therefore, if China uses force, then whatever implicit agreement that the U.S. had to recognize the PRC is no longer there. So I think that's fair to say that it's a condition. It's not a legal agreement. It's not like China ever accepted this as a condition of reestablishing relations with the United States. But it is something that guides U.S. law and how the U.S. would approach the problem.
John, so every time we hear Xi Jinping and the PRC say that they will not rule out force to reunify with Taiwan, why shouldn't the U.S. also say, well, are you sure about that? Because based on the TRA, there is this, as Julian has just described, there is a possibility then that we could recognize Taiwan.
I think there's a good reason to believe that any kind of use of force by China would be, earth-shattering and profoundly disruptive and cause instant changes all throughout U.S. decision-making about the sacred, red lines that they've had not crossed ever before. And if the red line is no longer there, then why would the U.S. be bound by it? If China says, well, we're attacking anyway, then why would anyone else feel restricted? As it is, the U.S. has a massive amount of trade and interaction with Taiwan. Japan does, Korea does, the Philippines do, other countries do, all within this region, none of which Beijing has particularly reached out to be friends with lately. There's constant clashes with all of those neighbors. And so those neighbors may also well change.
So since we are talking about statehood for Taiwan in the very specific scenario of an invasion, let's now discuss how well Taiwan meets the criteria for statehood. Firstly, there are 12 countries that recognize Taiwan. Some of those are Belize, Marshall Islands, Guatemala, Tuvalu, Paraguay, Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Kitts, and so on. And under the Montevideo Convention, which establishes the definition of statehood under international law, a state has the following 4 attributes: permanent population, defined territory, government, and capacity to enter into relations with other states. Professor Liu, let me ask you, so how does Taiwan compare, for example, to Gaza in 2 of the categories, defined territory and government?
The definition about state, territory, population is already there.
Right.
But still, other countries might not recognize Taiwan. So that is why I'm focusing on the last one. A lot of things we can take advantage of that, because the 4th essential elements for statehood in that convention, emphasizing the capacity to enter into relations with the other states. So in that case, if we have our own capacity, which is something very valuable to other countries, of course, people will treat us differently. But of course, not necessarily will be equivalent to statehood. But at least in terms of the Taiwan's presence, international community, it shows recently about semiconductors. Yeah? U.S. has to go with Taiwan and ask Taiwan to make investment, TSMC, in the United States. Even U.S. Secretary of Finance even promote Taiwan. He said 99% of advanced semiconductors are produced in Taiwan.
Okay, bringing Julian back in.
I mean, there's a technical definition of statehood which Taiwan meets, but I think the main problem is political. Palestine does not meet any of the definitions of statehood, really, except that it has wide support in the international community. And so it's kind of the mirror opposite of Taiwan. So Taiwan has the technical definition, but actually very little recognition overseas. And Palestine has almost none of the characteristics that meet the definition, but has wide recognition overseas. And I think this suggests that the problem Taiwan faces is political, not legal, right? It's about convincing other countries to take Taiwan seriously as an independent state. And the only real reason they don't do so, because I think as Professor Liu mentioned, there are many reasons. Everyone does trade with Taiwan. Everyone has good relations with Taiwan. The reason is only one reason. It's called China. It's China's political pressure and fear of punishment or retaliation from China. So I think that's really the only thing that's holding Taiwan back in this situation. I think pointing this out is worth doing, though, and continuing to make clear that Taiwan does meet the characteristics and that it's really purely a political limitation imposed by China will help push back against China's claim that everyone understands Taiwan is not a state, because I think this is the contrast between Taiwan and Palestine, which China does recognize as a state, is pretty dramatic.